Okay, I think we will get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Kapner Research Council webinar series. This is the last CRC webinar of the spring semester, and we have two very special guests from the National Science Foundation with us today. Dr. Anye Hees, a member of the Kapner Research Council, will make the formal introduction of the speakers. But before we do so, I would like to say a few words about the Kapner Research Council. Well, we formalized the CRC about 2 years ago as an advisory council that would provide advice to my office, that is the Kapner Office of Research. Well, we do have faculty from every division represented on the council, and we have 6 divisions, as you know, in Kapner. We also have a staff member from Kapner and a second staff member from NextGen, showcasing our connection to that campus initiative. We have 2 graduate students representing the student body, and also a postdoc representing the postdoctoral scholars in our college. This webinar is an example of some of the activities of the council, in addition to providing advice to me and my office. They also help me in making important decisions, and when they do so, they are representing you, our faculty, staff, and students. We are updating the CRC website so that you can learn a lot more about the CRC, the role they play in shared governance in our college, and their specific activities. Before I hand over to Dr. Hees, let me remind everyone that you can post your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat room, anytime during or after the talk. Dr. Hees will be moderating the Q&A session in the end. So, without further ado, Dr. Hees, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Jose. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce 2 program directors from the National Science Foundation, and specifically from the Integrative Organismal Systems, Michael Mishkind and Patrick Abbot, as he likes to be referred to. And I would like to introduce both of them and give a little bit of background to them, or about them. So Michael got his PhD in the cellular and developmental biology at Stony Brooks in Barry Palowitz's lab. Then moved on to do a visiting student, or as a visiting student to Ken Keeksh's lab when he was still in Madison, went for a postdoc to the University of Georgia, to Gregory Schmidt's lab, and then actually started his career at Bennington College as a faculty member. And before moving then to becoming first a rotating director at the NSF, first in the Division of Molecular and Cellular Biosciences in 2000, and then moving on as a permanent director in the Division of Integrative Organismal Systems. And so I actually remember Michael from his sabbatical. We overlapped. Actually, I remember him from a long time ago. Met him the first time during my PhD at the PRL when he came and gave a talk there. And then actually Michael had done multiple sabbatical, one in Howard Riesman's lab at the University of Basel. This is where we overlapped while I did my postdoc there. And but Michael is actually very involved still active in science as a permanent director, and he's doing quite a bit of his sabbaticals with TU Munich, which some of you may know, at the University of Amsterdam. And so currently, since 2006, Michael has been a permanent director, and he's currently the permanent director at the Plant Biotics Interactions, so PBI program. And I also want to introduce Patrick at this point. So Patrick is actually currently a a professor, associate professor at Vanderbilt University, where he has been moving up through the ranks since 2004. And he is a rotating director in the behavioral systems cluster in IOS. And he started his career first as with his MS at Simon Fraser University, and his interest is in behavioral ecology, and then moved on to do his PhD at the University of Arizona, again in ecology and evolutionary biology, and a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Texas in Austin. Before then, as I said, he moved forward as an assistant and associate professor at Vanderbilt University, and he has joined since 2019 IOS as a rotating director. And with that, I would like to basically give the stage to Michael and Patrick. And the way this works, just that you know, we had talked about this before, Michael and Patrick, that they will give about a 15-20 minute talk, and then afterwards we have a Q&A session. They will switch back and forth between Michael and Patrick depending on what they want to emphasize. And I will then read out, please put your question into the Q&A, not the chat room, and I will read then the questions out loud, and Michael and Patrick will then answer your question. Thanks very much. Thanks, Michael and Patrick.
Sure. Thanks for that really nice introduction, Antje. It's a really great pleasure to be here and for Patrick and me to share what's going on in IOS, what our funding priorities are and how to get funding and all of that. This building that you see in the background, I haven't been in for the past year. It's the NSF building. We're working no different than ever, but we are now outside of this central location. As everybody well knows, the NSF is a major presence in making science happen in the United States. The current budget is $8.5 billion. The vast majority of that funding goes out the door to support research in your labs. So we work very efficiently at making this money do its work. And it's an example of the kind of impact we have. So many graduate students, lots of awards are supported, and some really excellent science comes out. So it's a really wonderful place to work. So if you have any questions about being a rotator or being on a panel, definitely speak to Patrick and me about that. Okay, so just to bring things up to date a little bit, with the new administration, the priorities of the Natural Science Foundation aren't changing in any fundamental ways, but a lot of them have now come up to be sort of headlines. The budget request, and this is from a web link that's available on the front page at the nsf.gov. The request for the NSF is quite a large increase relative to the $8.5 billion up to more than $10 billion for next year. And the emphasis will be on these 5 areas: to enhance fundamental research and development, address racial equity in science and engineering, address climate science and sustainability research, strengthen US leadership in emerging technologies, and finally construct additional major research facilities. So with these goals in mind, sort of our program is informed about what kind of decisions to make. This wouldn't be complete without, let's see, an organizational diagram like that. It wouldn't be a government agency if we weren't somewhere in some organizational place. The NSF is a freestanding agency. It's not part of a department like NIFA is in the Department of Agriculture. So we are directly under the president. So there are 3 research divisions and 1 infrastructure division in the biology directorate. Patrick and I are in IOS, as you already know, and each of these divisions is divided into clusters. I'm in the physiological and structural systems cluster, and Patrick is in behavioral systems, but we'll be able to speak to the entire group of clusters that form IOS. going to hand it over to Patrick now.
Yeah. And again, thank you guys for having us here. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you guys. Yeah, so as Michael said, one of the challenges for anybody, even a program officer, is figuring out the maze of federal agency, including NSF. And so what you're looking at here is a visual of the breakdown of the 13 programs in iOS. And this is relevant, right? Because when you're thinking about where does my research fit, where does my grant go, you're thinking about, well, what program? Sometimes, in fact, you feel like you might fall between programs. So if you count up these small boxes, there are 13 of them there. And they're arranged, when there's multiple ones, they're arranged into a cluster. So there's the behavioral systems cluster, which actually has only one program, developmental systems cluster with 3 programs, neural systems cluster with 3 programs, PSS, as we call it, has 4 programs. And then over on the right, purple and green, you see these 2 other programs, the EDGE program, the new program in functional genomics, and then the PGRP program in plant genomics. And so I won't read each of these, but just to not to help you out, let you know is that part of what Michael and I do is field inquiries from you, often with a 1 or 2 page description of your idea, and you say, where's the best home for me? And I think I fit with you, but where do I fit? We help you find that fit, and don't worry, that's what we do. We actually say, well, you know what, it looks like even after you submit your proposal, maybe you would be a good fit for 2 programs. And so we might reach out to some of our colleagues in iOS and say, hey, take a look at this grant. Do you think maybe we should review this together? All right, next slide. So we're speaking of funding then. So we have a number of funding opportunities in iOS, and of course there's many funding opportunities throughout NSF. And so the main one of interest is the core solicitation, NSF 2536. It's new and updated in the past several months, and this is a no deadline core solicitation to any of the programs, or well, not almost all of the programs in iOS. Michael's going to talk about his specialty, the PBI program with its own solicitation. Again, no deadline. And then we have the Plant Genome Research Program, NSF 21507. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment in another slide. Now, a new program that we have that does have a deadline is the Enabling Discovery Through Genomic Tools, the EDGE program. And in short, this is about what genes do. So it's functional genomics. And some programs, some solicitations have multiple tracks. That's a common thing at NSF. And indeed, the EDGE solicitation has 2 tracks. If you look into it, one is focused on tools, developing tools for research in non-model bacteria, fungi, plants, and animals. The idea is, how can we enable organisms that have not been enabled already and enable communities that have not been enabled? And I am actually on the working group, the EDGE working group. And the other track is focused, and this is a new track that was added in the new solicitation, is on complex traits. How can we build that map from genotype to phenotype to understand the genetic basis of complex traits? And that does have a deadline, February 17th, 2022. Michael.
Okay, just to give you an example of one program, the one that I'm involved in is plant biotic interactions. And we founded this program about 4 years ago when speaking with my colleague, Ann Lichens-Park in USDA NIFA, we realized that we were both supporting the same kind of research. We were leaning more towards basic fundamental work, where they were also doing fundamental research, but also moving more in the translational direction. So to give PIs a chance to work anywhere within that continuum from basic to translational, we decided to merge our programs and have one competition. And that's what you see described here. And that includes everything from beneficial to antagonistic interactions. Our focus is on molecular and cellular perspectives on the mechanisms that underlie the interactions. So in terms of putting proposals together, you can be anywhere, but you have to make it clear whether you're asking a fundamental question about how something works, how you're also perhaps putting that to work to develop a new agricultural application, or maybe you're focused completely on the agricultural application of some basic knowledge. Everything like that works well in this program. You submit through the NSF. The reviewing process is the same as any other program at the NSF. Then when it comes to funding, some of the proposals are funded by us at NSF, and others are taken by Ann Litchens Park to fund at USDA NIFA. But to underline what Patrick was saying, the most important lesson from today's discussion is that you should feel absolutely free to contact NSF program directors. As Patrick mentioned, a 1 or 2 page summary is a nice way to sort of open the door. Then we'll get back to you when we can discuss the fine points of your research and where best it can be submitted. Our goal isn't to sort of make your research conform to one of our programs, but to give the most informed and useful review of the work that you want to take care of. Now we'll go through a number of other programs, and here you see this slide concerns facilitating research at primarily undergraduate institutions. Obviously, we're not talking to such an institution, but the reason why I wanted to bring it up is that part of this program includes something called Research Opportunity Awards. This is a very much underused mechanism that could be very helpful to faculty at undergraduate institutions. And what it is a supplement to a pre-existing NSF grant to support a faculty member at one of these institutions to come and work in your lab, either for a summer, it could be even for a sabbatical. So this is a really great opportunity to really transform the scientific existence of people at undergraduate institutions, and also to increase the diversity of people who are pursuing research in the areas supported by the NSF. So people from minority serving institutions can come. So I think the reason why it's underused is it's not clear who should be recruiting people. So as PIs at a fundamental research university, you can invite people to your lab and then talk to your program manager about getting a supplement to support that person. Or somebody at that 4-year institution could just have a cold email and ask, do you have room in your lab for me? But this is something to look into because I think it's an underused and potentially very influential opportunity. We also have a number of competitions that are specific for particular stages in one's career. Everyone undoubtedly is familiar with the career program, with the next deadline coming up on July 26th. And if there are questions about career, we'd be happy to go into more detail. But here the proposals are meant to, in a major way, integrate your research and your educational and outreach. The education and outreach fall into the broader impacts, and these in a career have to be much more extensive than you would find in a regular proposal, where broader impacts are also very important. Another opportunity is for associate professors to take a leave from their lab and become familiar with new technical approaches, new research areas that they could bring back to their own lab and then bring their own lab up to the point where they're sort of at the leading edge of what's going on. This is something that's brand new, and Patrick and I would be happy to talk to you about that as well. Okay, finally, in this area, there's the postdoctoral fellowships in biology. And here, this is a deadline program, the next deadline coming up in November of this year. And there are 3 general areas that you see. I was advised by the person running the plant genome section is that there are a lot of people who applied to areas 1 and 2 who were appropriate for the plant genome postdoctoral fellowships. And since there were fewer applicants there, it would be a good idea to move your proposal from areas 1 and 2 into 3. And as with regular research proposals, it can be very helpful to contact the program director to decide how best to put your proposal together to be competitive in this particular competition. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to Patrick. We're going to talk about grant writing in general.
Yeah, and I'll go fairly quickly through this so we have time for your questions. And I just want to summarize really quickly on that section. Michael and I are presenting, there's a menu. You're at a restaurant with a lot of things on the menu, and we're highlighting certain things that we thought you might be particularly interested in, but there are many other funding opportunities at NSF. And we're just highlighting some of those that are, so the take-home advice, I'll reemphasize, Michael will undoubtedly say it again too, is if you want to know more, contact your program officer or a program officer and just ask questions, something I haven't done enough in my own career. So about writing NSF grants, I don't know in the audience how many folks are currently funded or applied before, have never applied before. But if you haven't applied before or you're unfamiliar, NSF basically breaks down our review emphases or our expectations into two broad categories: intellectual merit and broader impacts. And this doesn't come from NSF, this comes from the parent organization that defines NSF's mission. And the first is intellectual merit. So we can think of that as shorthand as the purely scientific content of your proposal. And we ask reviewers, we ask you, and we ask panelists to evaluate proposals based on the potential for advancing knowledge in your field and across fields. Is the research creative, original, potentially transformative? Is the concept going to change in a fundamental way how we think about science? We ask for you and for reviewers to focus on whether there's a fundamental question or a gap in knowledge that you are filling. And have you written a proposal that is organized and the rationale well laid out in terms of the ideas, the conceptual framework, and the experimental plan about how you're actually going to tackle that fundamental gap? We ask reviewers to address and speak to the qualification of the investigators for the question that they had laid out. If this is an entirely brand new area and you've never worked in this area before and you're not collaborating and you have no background, that's something you'll want to talk to your program officer about. And then whether you have access to the resources to actually do the research that you're actually interested in, you're planning. Can't emphasize enough the value of using the NSF proposal and award policies and preparation guide, the PAPG we call it. It's online, and it is the guiding document that tells you and tells us how to prepare and submit grants. What are the parts that are required to be there? What parts can't be there? Next slide. But for some of you who are not familiar with NSF, this might be the most mysterious part of the grant writing process, which is NSF's second major pillar of grant writing, which is our broader impact merit review criteria. And this is really about how does your project benefit society? How is the taxpayers' money that's going to go out the door? How does that broadly benefit society, inclusive of and also beyond the science that you're actually proposing to do? So, for example, some things. So, the science itself. What's the impact and applications of the research results for society at large? And beyond that, how do you build into your research plan such things as ideas to enhance infrastructure for research and education? Whether the research, the plan that you're actually developing builds a diverse and globally competitive STEM workforce, which is one of the main priorities that NSF has, which is the next generation that is globally competitive and diverse. Does your research increase in some kind of way scientific literacy and public engagement? Or do you promote teaching and training and education in some kind of unique and novel or creative way? And then do you actually bring in, does science that we're doing look like America? So are we broadening participation of underrepresented groups into the fold of science? Well, I'm not saying that your broader impacts have to do all of these things. These are examples of some of the things that you might think about as you build the broader, as you define the broader impacts of your research. Next slide.
Yeah, and just to underline what Patrick was just saying, these are not check boxes. You should do something that you really want to do, that's appropriate given the situation at your institution. and design it with enough specificity that a reviewer will be able to evaluate whether this makes sense, whether it's tractable, and all of that. It's the same as intellectual merit in that respect. So let's go on to the next slide then.
Yeah, do you have a plan? Yeah, so here is some things proposed, some components that you should think about as you build your broader impacts, or you define and describe the broader impacts. So for example, you should have specific and accessible goals which align with NSF's goals. And as Michael said, that's a very good point. Just like you would describe the scientific intellectual merit of your research. You would never just say, I'm going to do an experiment, right? You would actually say, here is what I'm going to do. Well, the same thing when you say, here is the impact of my research on society, here's what I'm going to do. So it should be well-reasoned and relevant to the proposed research. So it does make sense that the broader impacts aligns with the scientific, the intellectual merit. So those two things are synergistic. Who in society is going to benefit from the plans you describe? Can you take advantage of existing institutional programs? Doesn't say you have to, but can you? If they're there, that allow you to add value to the taxpayers' dollars, to utilize those makes sense. Is it appropriate to your situation or your environment or your professional goals? Is it consistent, in other words, like Michael's just said, with something that you want to do in terms of the work you're going to be doing? Is it sustainable? In other words, will it live past the life of the grant? Do you include a mechanism to assess what you've done? Is there an assessment plan? In other words, you could bring in someone from your university who thinks about pedagogy or education or outreach as a profession, and they could actually work with you in your work. And that's important because, one of the ways that we measure the success of the intellectual or scientific part is we look at the publications. So this assessment plan, you can think of that as, what is the productivity? How do you measure success? If there's a need for a budget, if you're planning on using undergraduates as part of your research plan, and they're going to do some outreach or going to work in say a K-12 school, and that requires funds for that, have you budgeted for it? What's the plan? What's the management plan, the timeline for this? And if you have a track record, having done this in the past, can you leverage that? Can you explain that or illustrate that in the grants? What have you done in the past that gives reviewers confidence that you can deliver on what you're promising right now?
Yes, and it's also important to not simply say, I'm going to do what I've been doing for the last 5 years. If you are going to do the same thing, explain what you're going to do, because people really want to be able to picture how this will fit in with the research that's going on. Okay.
Right. So as one program officer gave me the key words I've been looking for, because sometimes you see principal investigators say, well, I've been teaching this class and I'm going to teach this class. This will be a great, means for broader impacts. Well, what added value is the grant going to bring to the class, to that? So what are you going to do that adds value to what you're already doing? It doesn't have to be that you build from scratch, but how will the taxpayers' dollars add value to the excellent work you've already been doing? The broader impact sections in the project summary and the project description this is getting down to brass tacks, because if you've never done this before, you're thinking, well, how much of the proposal, my 15 pages, do I devote to describing my broader impacts? And typically, and Michael can speak to this as well, has more experience than I do, but typically you see 1 to 2 pages of those 15 pages used to describe your broader impacts. So approach it the same way you approach a research plan, and avoid these classic mistakes. Just describing your past accomplishments, for example, saying, I did all this stuff in the past, believe me, I'm going to do something good in the future. That doesn't work, because panelists or reviewers are told to evaluate the work that they see in front of them. And so they are making a projection into the future. And so if you just describe the past, that does not help them. A laundry list that lacks convincing detail. They're unfocused activities with unrealistic outcomes. In other words, it's just word salad. Don't do that. If you're planning to deliver content for public education or K-12 outreach without showing evidence of the need or interest, and that's a really important one. So have you actually talked to, ahead of putting in the grant, talked with administrators at K-12 schools or wherever and said, and asked them, what do you need from me? How can we work together? Not just something that you're going to do if you get the money.
Yeah, along those lines, along those lines, you really need letters of collaboration, not only from colleague scientists, but from colleague teachers or evaluators who will help out. So, and there's a very specific mechanism for having a letter of collaboration. So that PAPPG that Patrick mentioned is going to be your Bible as you put together your proposal. All of that information is there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all in the PAPG. It's a long document, but it's in there, I promise you. Here's a classic one, and then I'll stop. Develop a website or a blog with no plan to attract users or assess impact. So a classic thing that we see is, I'm going to bring in students from underrepresented groups into research, without describing at all how those students are going to find you or you're going to find them. And you will have reviewers who have a lot of experience doing this, and they'll know that it's not that easy, right? So if you're going to build a website, how do people know the website's there? And then how do you assess the benefit, the impact that it actually had? So, all right, I'm done with this page. If you are, Michael. And then Michael, I'll quickly go through this, but I'll pass it on to you. So just some advice for writing an excellent proposal, NSF proposal. And here's some just tidbits that you can see right to your audience. A classic thing is that you love your research and you love what you do and you love your organisms, but you don't realize that the reviewers may not know your organisms or your research area as well as you do. And so they miss the big picture. So you have to put it in the context of a general big picture. You need to show that the work is going to identify gaps and hypotheses, as we said before, and you have a plan. And one thing that I tell PIs that I do talk to, you're trying to generate the kind of excitement in reviewers that you feel about the research yourself. And that excitement is really, really crucial, because if they feel excited, like you feel excited, that's a huge plus. Proof of concept or a track record to demonstrate feasibility. Feasibility is always a big issue. So, you basically need to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. Describe your expected outcomes and how you're going to evaluate those outcomes. Don't try to hide the fact that sometimes things are going to fail. What you should do is provide for alternative plans if things don't work out. So your hypothesis, your alternative hypothesis is not supported. You're back to your null hypothesis. So what then? And relate those outcomes. And a typical mistake is at the end of a proposal, you realize that the question was well framed at the beginning, but by the end of the proposal, it is not clear how the work itself is going to address that great framing that you actually set up in the beginning. Michael?
Yeah, that's a common criticism of proposals. Do the experiments have anything to do with the motivating hypotheses? The audience is kind of difficult to address because it will contain experts in the field and also just simply widely educated biologists. And you have to keep both people tied in and make them excited about the work. So you shouldn't cram your proposal with 10 zillion acronyms and and detailed diagrams that you need to expand on your screen in order to make out what's going on there. So it takes a knack to write well, and a well-written proposal is a joy to read because you really get excited about the science and you want to call up the guy and say, hey, I want to work in your lab. So have colleagues read it, both the experts and the non-experts, before you submit it. in order to get a sort of a proof of concept there that you're getting across what you think you're getting across. And we'll obviously talk about any questions you might have about writing things. Just to end up, the NSF really allows you to find very quickly who to speak to. And the best way to search the NSF website is not to use the NSF search function, but simply to use Google. So if you put in Google career and NSF, if you put in career NSF, you'll go right to the page there. You won't do it if you search the NSF thing. So start off your search there. And then you can go to the particular divisions within the biology directorate. And from the particular division, you can see what the research areas are. You can find out who to contact. And here's where you find the contact information of the program directors. And don't feel like you have to get the perfect program director the first time you write. If the person you picked isn't quite right, and that person will then redirect you to somebody else who will be able to give you right on advice. The NSF is an amazingly collegial place. We talk not only to people within our division, but across the entire biology directorate and beyond the biology directorate into physics and math and engineering and things like that. So we really want to get the best review for your science. We don't want your science to conform to some predetermined mold. So it's a very open place, not only within the agency, but also to the scientific community. So don't at all feel inhibited about contacting us. There's a search function on the nsf.gov page that will allow you to narrow into the general area that you're trying to locate the most appropriate program. One just very quick note, given, as we call it, the agency across the river, we don't support biomedical research per se in the biology directorate. If you're studying a particular disease or a drug to see its mode of action and things like that, you're not the agency for us. So if you send us a 1 to 2 page summary, we'll be able to let you know that as currently conceived, this will not be appropriate for NSF. But many projects can then be reformed in a way that really answers a fundamental biological question. So it's something to talk to your program director about. In other directorates, such as engineering, there is biomedical work that's going on. So you really have to fish out what the specifics are in each of the agencies, each of the directorates. We are very eager to give you as much information as possible. So we use the same format that we're following now in all of the divisions in the biology directorate, where we have virtual office hours on particular topics. So for example, in IOS, next month's topic is going to cover the career program. So you can get lots of detailed information about career if you sign up. And there's very straightforward directions on how to register for one of these virtual office hours. We're also on these sorts of things that I know nothing about, but a lot of people use them. So feel free to look at us in these various social media. Finally, some questions. This is the mural that one sees when you walk into the building. And so Patrick and I haven't seen this for a while. So I'm going to hand it over to Antje, who will start with the questions, I guess.
Yeah, and we have a couple of questions already,
Yeah.
and I will read them out. So Alison Meyer asked, how do you feel about considering students from rural US as underrepresented for the broader impact, or using food production under broader impact?
Both are perfectly good broader impacts. So unfortunately, we can't classify certain ethnic backgrounds as being minority, but you can write about the fact that you're appealing to first-generation college students. And that could be a very forceful broader impact. We see that quite often. And agricultural or food security issues shouldn't be at the direct focus of your work, but it definitely can be a very compelling broader impact.
Okay. And I go then to Abe Cool is asking, how often do grant panels meet nowadays for iOS programs that have no deadline? That's actually a really good question. Thanks, Abe. That was my question as well.
Patrick, do you want to start off?
Yeah, well, we don't announce when the panels meet, and so we have a rule at NSF that all proposals have a goal of being reviewed within 6 months of submission, and so that you have an answer. Sometimes because of extenuating circumstances, we go slightly beyond that, but the goal is that from the day you submit to 6 months out, you will hear the answer before that. And so we do have proposals, as you know, we have programs that do have deadlines. And so you can, if there's one deadline a year, then there's one panel a year. But Michael, what do you think about that?
Yeah, the deadline issue is really sort of an interesting sociological experiment where the deadline programs have been sort of constant and increasing in the number of applicants, whereas the no deadline programs, even though every single day is a potential deadline, our proposal rate is less than 50% of what we saw before we had a deadline. So it's a good time to apply. And in addition, given the subsidies that are being discussed in terms of coping with the pandemic, there will likely be extra money coming down the pike to help, especially people at transitions, beginning and young investigators, the career program. So it's a really good time to get your proposals into the NSF.
Yeah.
In terms of when we schedule these things, we wait for a certain number of proposals to appear, and then we convene a panel to review those proposals. And there are extenuating circumstances that slow things down. For example, our collaborating agency in the plant biotic interactions program moved to Kansas City, and that has slowed things down a bit because of the reestablishment of their office that's necessary in a new place. But that 6 month thing is a very strong rule of thumb that we try to follow.
It is. They hold our feet to the fire when we go beyond that. We get some stern words from our bosses. But the crucial thing is, and this is not a satisfying answer, but it's the truth, which is put the proposal in when it's ready, but put it in, like Michael said, put it in. And so we do have some questions of people trying to time it so that there's, can I try to time it to get it into, and that's not the way to go. The way to go is to put it in when it's ready. But as Michael said, the sociological experiment is really interesting because there's no deadlines, and we all have fires to put out every day in our jobs. And sometimes those proposals get pushed down the line. And we do have principal investigators calling us saying, can you just give me a personal deadline that you're going to be really mad at me if you don't submit? And so we'll say, sure. Okay, what do you want? 3 weeks? Okay, if you don't submit it by 3 weeks, I'm going to be really mad. So
I like that. So actually, I want to follow up here a little bit because we're at this submission deadline. So how is actually, you have panel members and then you have ad hoc reviewers. So how is that selected for people who may not be as familiar, the composition?
Well, the entire research community are candidates to be ad hoc reviewers and or panelists. So we choose panelists to have particular expertise, but also to have wide background knowledge and also wide curiosity about a general area of science. Because the numbers of proposals have gone down quite a bit, we're expanding the breadth of sort of the intellectual areas and disciplines covered in particular panels. So, for example, the plant biotic interactions panel is now reviewing some proposals in plant physiology as well. So we have expertise that crosses those boundaries, and those boundaries are not very major, because anybody who studies a plant pathogen has to know plant biology in general very deeply. One thing that one should do when submitting a proposal is to suggest reviewers. And this is not to suggest your best friend or somebody who might have a conflict, but somebody who will be able to give a convincing and well thought out review of the proposal. So we are very much on top of the community, but there are always new investigators, people in other countries. So it's really very helpful if you suggest some potential reviewers who will be able to give a truly informed analysis of the proposal.
So it could also be outside of the US then.
Yes, right.
But you can't have a conflict of interest, though. You have to make sure that. But we love volunteers, don't we, Michael? We love panel volunteers, and so please, you know, there's no shame at all. And if you want to be on a panel, you've never been on one, drop us an email saying, can you put me on the list? And we obviously try to match the panelists to the distribution of the science that we get. We want people as with as much expertise as possible. And so sometimes what you do may not fit a particular panel. But we also have other metrics, and we try to make sure that our panelists look like the country, geographically, racially, by gender, by all different, everything we can imagine. So we have extremely, I'm amazed and impressed by this organization, the diversity of reviewers and panelists that are involved. It is you guys. So it's something to be proud of.
Yeah, diversity of institutions as well, from Research One universities to undergraduate institutions to sort of research institutes. So
let me move on here. Ron Midler asks, he has two questions. His first question is, will there be a chance that postdoc grants to be given to non-residents? Many of our postdocs are not US citizens, and they would benefit from postdoc grants.
yeah, I have to check that out, but I don't think, since the postdoc grants go directly to the individual and not to the institution, that you have to be a US citizen or permanent resident.
Okay. So, and I think actually, Ron, I invited somebody who will talk specifically about that on the CAFNA Research Day. So keep your eye open, and I'll send you, we actually have an NSF program director that can probably address this more about postdoctoral funding. I send you the information. And Ron's second question was, would the additional funds anticipated next year increase funding to regular panels, or will they go to new programs in NSF?
That's a very good question, but the way in which the pie is cut and distributed is something that, as program directors, we don't have any influence on. However, given the importance of a particular program, it's the squeaky wheels getting the grease to some extent. There is a very strong allegiance to the core programs, and so whenever there is a little boost to the NSF budget, we see more funds coming to the core programs. Okay, and in terms of postdocs, on a regular research grant, a postdoc can be paid if that person is not a US citizen. So it's just the independent postdoc awards that are subject to the citizen criterion.
Yeah, and I don't know the numbers, but you know, we obviously have a lot of grants that have postdocs written into them. So and I'll just add really quickly to what Michael said. You know, with the CARES Act funding, that funding, this is not what the question was about, but that funding was targeted towards addressing how the pandemic has affected careers, and so that the money has been targeted, or at least that the focus has been on those folks that have been most affected by this past year that we've all been through. So early career scientists, postdocs. The postdoc funding we funded 50% more postdocs this past year than we did before. More career grants have gone out the door, higher funding rate there. There's been an added for those with existing postdoctoral funded. There's been a year added, I believe. Is that right, Michael? Are you familiar with this?
Yeah.
Right. So there's been the CARES Act funding has been targeted towards mitigating the impacts on careers.
Okay. So, and Alison Meyer has another question. Also, any specific suggestions for writing NSF proposals for those who have only applied so far to who have only applied to USDA and or NIH? Because we have a large number of the animal sciences that may be more appropriate there.
You'd have to base your work on a fundamental biological problem. Not a particular, if a disease is being studied, that disease should be a good tool for approaching that problem, but it shouldn't be the focus of the work. You can mention potential payoffs in terms of health as a broader impact, but that should not be the motivation for the particular research that's going on. Is there anything?
I mean, the one thing I would say is crowdsource your proposal. I mean, if you have friends that or colleagues that have received NSF grants before in the past or been on panels before, put them to work and ask them to not hold back, or ask them to if you can see their proposals, or and to get examples. I certainly asked my PhD advisor, who I think always got NSF grants. I asked her to see if I could see some of her examples of hers. And another thing to do that's not a bad idea is all funded grants are required to put their abstracts are publicly accessible. So go to the awards database on the NSF website and put in some keywords of maybe something that you work on or familiar, and just read about the examples of the kinds of research. And that's not going to help you write it, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of questions, both in terms of intellectual merit and broader impacts that folks are doing.
Yeah, and in fact, every program has a little link at the bottom of the program page saying recently funded awards. You click on that and you get the abstracts and the funding. One emphasis that IOS is leaning towards these days is approaches to complex biological processes and how underlying mechanisms at the genetic, biochemical, cellular level lead to the emergence of whole organism traits such as immunity or development or things like that. So if your research spans levels of organization in that way, IOS is the place to come. So.
Yeah. So what about actually high risk, high reward, where you don't have a lot of, when you have a good idea, have some, but not maybe as much preliminary results as I would normally put into a proposal? Are there funding opportunities?
Yeah, there's a specific program called EAGRS, whose the acronym, I don't know what it stands for anymore. Early, I think, is the, but that is for potentially very high impact, potentially very controversial ideas for which you have an inkling there might be something there, but you don't have enough preliminary data to make it a convincing proposal for a full panel review. Then the EAGR program is something to look at, and that gives 2 years of funding for $300,000. It's not a program simply to collect preliminary data. There has to be a driving force of some very compelling and influential, potentially influential idea behind it. Again, that 1 to 2 page summary is the thing to send to a program director to see if does this fit something that will work as an EAGR proposal.
Okay. Okay, Aid Koo has another question. Does Mid-Career Advancement Program, the MCA, support visits to labs in other countries?
I believe it does, yes. You have to argue why you need to go to another country to get that particular new expertise, but I'm pretty sure it's okay.
Okay, and I think I'm just reading down. I hope I didn't miss anybody here. Abe also asked, what is the projection of funding rate like for the next 6 months based on how it looks now?
Depends on how many. I mean, the funding rate is, it's a fraction, right? It's one number over another. So it is how much money NSF has, and and then how many grants to come in. And as Michael said, with no deadlines, the number of grant submissions dropped, and so funding rates went up. And so the question really becomes, how many proposals are going to come in the next 6 months? And so we can't answer that question. All we can say is that historically, in the past couple of years, which coincides with my time at NSF, funding rates have been pretty good compared to what they were when I was trying to get tenure. So they've been, it varies by program, but they've been in the 25% range, right, Michael? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And before that, they were less than 10%.
Yeah, that's what they were when I was growing up.
Yeah, I think when I got my first one, it was 8 or so, 7%.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let me see. Oh, it took some tries. Let me just see here. Yeah, I think I covered every question that were at least written out in the Q&A question. I actually have one more. Let me see how much time we have. We have 2 more minutes. I actually have a question that I know we had discussed in our, in our plant community, in the IPG community. So we have a very productive program going in our for as broader impact. This freshman research in plant sciences, and this program has been really productive. How is that building on? Can I now, say in the last program, I had funding going towards this program, and can I build on to that? For a while, it sounded like as if we always had to come up with something new, but actually building on something that is working is more productive and effective, I think, in the long term. Do I misunderstand, or?
Yeah, you very clearly understand. We don't want wheels reinvented. And if you could be very effective using a pre-existing program, do so, but you have to be very specific about how this particular time you want to accomplish this, which goes beyond what you did before, or you want to maintain a very high level of performance and speak to how that is. It's different in career proposals where we're really looking for novel, creative, broader impacts in educational work. Any proposal that comes in and plugs into a pre-existing program as a career proposal generally doesn't get reviewed all that strongly. So.
Okay, let me see. Maybe I have one last check in the, I hope. If I didn't answer anybody's question, maybe just say, maybe you can say something.
Yeah, but the important lesson here are those email addresses on the page that's being shown now, where NSF program directors are there to help you out. So don't feel at all inhibited or reluctant to get in touch with us.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, both of you. And I think, Shivu, you would like to say something at the end. So.
Yep. All right. Well, let me also add my thanks to our speakers for an informative talk about funding opportunities from NSF and for leading a lively Q&A session. So thank you, Michael and Patrick. And thanks to all of you for attending today's webinar. I would like to remind everyone that we have posted all the previous CRC webinars over the last year online on the CAFNR webpage, and you can watch them under the research page. We will be posting today's webinar also shortly. I talked about the CRC and some of their activities in my introductory remarks. Dr. Heath already mentioned about this. CRC is getting ready to organize a CAFNR Research Day this year, scheduled for May 7th. So they are working on an exciting agenda. An agenda that will be appealing to our faculty, staff, and students, we hope. So we will share the agenda with all of you as soon as it is finalized. Well, that concludes today's webinar. Again, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the afternoon and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well,
Bye.
thanks also from me to everybody and or to everybody attending, and also to Michael and Patrick for giving this great talk. Thanks.
It's our honor. Thank you guys so
It's our
much.
pleasure. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.